Hey, what's going on, everybody? Commander Crane here, and we are back with another Pioneer deck tech, and today we're going to be talking about budget mono blue Ensoul. I'm very excited to bring this list to you. As always, at the end of the video, let me know in the comment section, what do you think about the deck? Is there a card that I definitely should have included, but I didn't? And if you were going to upgrade this deck, what would you personally include in the deck? Just let me know in the comment section. So we've never actually done an Ensoul deck on the channel here, which I was a little surprised by that. And honestly, there's been a lot of fantastic additions, in the last couple sets for Ensoul decks. Before it was like we only had a couple different ways to actually be able to Ensoul, and a lot of the artifacts that, we were enchanting were not super duper strong. But that has changed in recent sets. So let's go and hop into here. So Ensouling, for those who don't know, Ensoul essentially means animating one of your artifacts to turn it into a creature. So these are a couple of the main ways that we're animating our creature. So we have the Black Staff of Waterdeep, essentially one in a blue, tap it, make something a 4/4 artifact creature for as long as the Black Staff of Waterdeep remains tapped. I'm definitely a big fan of this card. What's also pretty sweet is not that you would do it very often, but in a pinch, you also can just play like the Black Staff of Waterdeep, and then you can Ensoul it or play Zoetic Glyph on it, which is pretty funny. But yeah, definitely a big fan of the card. And obviously, we're playing 4 copies of Ensoul Artifact. I don't know if it's technically like the original of this effect, but in terms of like the cards that are in the deck, it was like the original one, I guess, if that makes sense. But, 2 mana, make it a 5/5, definitely very, very strong. And then we're playing 4 Zoetic Glyph from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, turns it into a 5/4, and when Zoetic Glyph is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, discover 3. So definitely a big fan of Zoetic Glyph in general. It's 1 more mana, it's a little smaller, but you get the discover 3 off of it, which is pretty solid overall. So next slide, we got to talk about our last way to Ensoul something, and that's Skilled Animator. We're playing 3 copies of it. It's a little more flimsier for the most part. That's why we're only playing 3 copies of it. But make something a 5/5, and you get a body out of it. So there's positives and negatives to it. Obviously it's a 1/3 creature, so if the creature dies, then your artifact is not Ensouled anymore. So it's a little bit of give or take, but. We're also playing 4 copies of Stonecoil Serpent and 4 Gingerbrute, my personal favorite cards to actually Ensoul. So, again, what's really, really great with Stonecoil Serpent, let's say we play for even X equals 1 or X equals 2, and then we, make it like a 5/5, for instance. That means with the 2+1/+1 counters, it's a 7/7, which is pretty sweet. So, Stonecoil Serpent is definitely one of the better creatures to actually Ensoul, along with Gingerbrute, just because Gingerbrute, it's got the haste on it, you can tap 1, and it still can't be blocked by creatures, unless it's by creatures with haste. So Gingerbrute is really, really good. A lot of the time, if our opponents can't even block it, they just die in just a couple turns to the Gingerbrute that is Ensouled. So definitely a big fan of that card in general. Next slide, we're playing some of our more other things that we Ensoul. So we're playing 4 Ornithopter. Ornithopter is pretty much good just because of the fact that essentially, it's just a 5/5 flyer. That's really why we're playing it for the most part. Really no other reason other than that for the most part. There's technically other cards we could play in this slot, but it's classic Ornithopter. We have to play it, obviously. We're also playing 4 Spyglass Siren. This card is really, really good. 1/1 for 1 flying. When it enters the battlefield, create a map token. Obviously, you can use the map token to help explore, or you can just, turn 1 Spyglass Siren, turn 2 Ensoul Artifact, and then attack for 6. Whatever, it's just casual 6 damage. Whatever, don't worry about it. We're also playing 2 copies of Case of the Filched Falcon, a card that I definitely undervalued for sure in Murders at Karlov Manor. So when it enters the battlefield, investigate, and then to solve it, you have to control 3 or more artifacts, which is not hard for our deck to do at all. And then once it's solved, we can tap 2 in a blue, sacrifice and put 4 1/1 counters on a non-creature artifact, and it becomes a 0/0 bird with flying. The flying is really, really huge in that because, again, we're pretty much playing Ornithopter just because it has flying, and then obviously the case is able to, make our map token or something like that into a flyer, which is definitely very, very sweet. Definitely a huge fan of Case of the Filched Falcon. So our last slide we got to talk about here is really just, I would say, the extra cards we're playing. We're playing 4 copies of Ghostfire Blade. So all of our creatures that we animate are colorless, essentially. So, unless we're enchanting like the Black Staff of Waterdeep. So it's equip 1 to give it +2/+2, which is pretty sweet. And once again, obviously, we can equip the ghost, we can Ensoul the Ghostfire Blade if we need to as well. So definitely a big fan of Ghostfire Blade. Then we're also playing 4 copies of Stubborn Denial. It's a really, really good counterspell. Essentially, it's a 1-mana negate as long as we have something Ensouled. And Stubborn Denial, funny enough, is actually the priciest card in the entire deck. It's about $3.50 US a piece right now, just because it's never been reprinted somehow. But Stubborn Denial is definitely very, very good. It's a fantastic counterspell. You know, you could substitute with like Spell Pierce if you don't want to buy the Stubborn Denials, but you know, definitely being able to counter something pretty much at any point in the game is definitely very, very sweet. So that's our entire main board except for our lands, and then we got to talk about our sideboard as well as some budget options. So the lands is really, really simple. We're playing 4 Darksteel Citadels as pretty much our main, you know, non-basic land, just because it's an artifact land, but it also is indestructible. There are other artifact lands that are currently in the format, but none of them are indestructible, so that's pretty much why we're playing the Darksteel Citadel. I mean, an indestructible 5/5 is really, really good. We're also playing 1 Tomb of the Spirit Dragon. So a little bit of a head scratcher in a way, but, you know, whenever we Ensoul any of our creatures, you know, they're colorless creatures, and I figured, you know, against, like, other aggro decks, you know, maybe that life gain could end up mattering, so I decided to just play 1 Tomb of the Spirit Dragon. You know, I mean, you could realistically play, like, any colorless utility land, but I really wanted to play Tomb of the Spirit Dragon just as, like, a spicy way to help us race against the other aggro decks of the format. And then we are playing 16 basic islands in our deck, again, because we're a budget deck, so basic lands are definitely the best way to go. And then as our spicy basic land of the day, we are playing the new Phyrexia All Will Be One Islands by Elena Danner. Fantastic artist. Always have to call her out whenever we use art, especially with basic lands. That is something she did. And, you know, I wanted to go for like an artifact-themed island, and this was kind of the best one I could find, I would say. Definitely a huge fan of the artwork. So let's go and hop into the sideboard here, which sideboard is really, really simple. We're going to want some counter spells. I would personally play a card like Metallic Rebuke just because, you know, we can improvise, tap our extra artifacts like our clue tokens or pretty much anything that's not ensouled to help counter some spells. You could also play a card like Mystical Dispute if you like, but I personally like Metallic Rebuke. Pithing Needle. Pithing Needle is really, really good in the format right now because it stops a number of different strategies and cards in the format. The biggest one being the Sorin Vampires deck that cheats out Vein Ripper. And you want to know what? At the end of the day, we can also Ensoul the Pithing Needle if we need to. It's a little dangerous to do, you know, because if they Bitter Triumph it and they unlock their Sorin, you know, not the best thing to do, but it is something we definitely can do. We're also playing Weathered Runestone. It's just a really good lock piece for the most part in the format. And once again, we can Ensoul it if we really, really need to. So, you know, it's 2 birds with 1 stone, which is pretty nice. And then I also put removal in bounce spells. I would personally play a card like Witness Protection, you know, turns our opponent's creature into a legitimate business person. You could also play a card like Rabbit Hybridization for removal. Sure, they get the 3/3, but guess what? All of our creatures are 4/4s and 5/5s, so most of the time, we're not really going to care about the 3/3. And then bounce spells is pretty self-explanatory. You can play really any number of bounce spells that are good in the format. Obviously, you know, like Petty Theft, Brazen Borrower is probably the best one, but not the best for our wallets, though. So it's really up to you for the most part. But if you want to know exactly what I'm playing in my sideboard, it's in the description below. You can check out the link, and you'll see exactly what I threw together there. And the last thing we have to talk about is the upgrade options, which it's pretty simple. Smuggler's Copter. Smuggler's Copter is really, really good in this deck. It's just not good for the budget deck. What's also really cool is if we Ensoul the Smuggler's Copter, it still gets the loot. It doesn't have to be crewed to be able to get that loot. It's just whenever it attacks. So when we make it a creature by Ensouling it, it just gets the loot, which is incredible. Utility lands, I would definitely play, you know, for instance, like Otawara. You know, you could even realistically, I didn't put any, what's the name of it? I'm forgetting. Hall of Storm Giants, mostly because we're never going to activate it for the most part. But, you know, if you wanted to go like a snow theme and maybe play a couple of Faceless Havens or something like that, you know, it's kind of up to you for the most part for utility lands. The last thing I want to mention is it Ensoul? Obviously, Is It Ensoul is, I would say, probably like one of the better-ish decks in the format as a whole, just because you get like Shrapnel Blast and you get some other good burn spells that have to deal with artifacts. You know, definitely making it Is It it's pretty huge for the most part, just because Shrapnel Blast, you know, especially when you play Ensoul Artifact, you hit them twice, and then maybe you just double Shrapnel Blast them for lethal, that kind of thing. So if you're looking to upgrade the deck, I highly suggest going to Is It. Is It will definitely help the deck a lot. But the last thing I want to mention is the current list, as it's built right now, is only $35 US, which is incredibly cheap for a good Pioneer deck, especially. I mean, if you're looking to play, a different deck at your FNM, or you're looking to play against, some friends that play Pioneer, this is definitely a really, really fun deck to build, and it's extremely cheap considering how strong the deck is. I know some of the budget decks we do on the channel here are not necessarily the strongest deck, but I would say this is probably one of the stronger budget decks I've ever featured here on the channel. So if you're looking to pick it up, I highly suggest it because this deck is a lot of fun. So that's pretty much everything. We already went over everything. We were playing a ton of 4-ofs in the deck for the most part, so it made it a lot easier to go through. But let me know in the comment section below, what's your favorite card that was featured in this list? And if you're upgrading it, what would you personally upgrade the deck to? Or maybe would you go like blue-white Ensoul? I know there's a lot of strong, white cards you could also play in a deck like this. Just let me know in the comment section. So I'm Commander Crane. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.